Hi guys. So we're going to continue with our discussion of files, and we're going to talk about writing data to files. We're going to look at how some of this works. Um, it's actually pretty easy. We're going to look at some example code to show you specifically how it works. So we can have what's called a method. So we haven't talked about objects um, because that's actually in chapter 10. It's a more advanced topic. But an object is like a variable. It's like a more complicated version of a variable. Basically, it's a variable that has data and functions associated with it. So we know what functions are. Um, the functions that we looked at, they don't have anything associated with them except for parameters. But we can have functions that it's hard to explain. But let's say we have an object like a cat object. We can have an object that represents a cat, and it can have a lot of different functions associated with that cat. And usually the functions have something to do with the object type that you're looking at. So a cat might have a meow function. It might have a use the cat box function. It might have a eat cat food function. And those functions only work with cat data, and so they're actually attached to the cat object. It's an abstraction. Again, we're going to talk about this later, but I wanted to sort of give you a brief overview so you understand what we're talking about when we talk about these methods. But basically, methods are functions that are attached to a specific data type, and they work on that data type. So um, a file object is an object. It's actually a class. It's an object, and so it has methods that we need to call to do things to that file. So the one we're going to look at to start with is the write method. So we have a write method that's used to write data to the file. The way that we use class methods is slightly different than you guys have used function calls in the past. In the past, you just used function calls just straight. The way that we're going to use these objects is we're going to use this dot syntax. So we're going to say variable name dot write, and there should be no spaces here, okay, between the dot. I always see people's variable name dot, and then they put space. I don't know if that's like practice from when they're writing essays and things, but there's no space between the dot and the write, and there's no space between the variable name and the dot. Okay, it's just variable name dot write, and then whatever you want to write to the function to the file. Um, so after we are finished writing to the file, we need to call this close method. So what the close method does is it actually, so when you call write, the operating system doesn't necessarily immediately write it out to the file, because if you write, let's say you just write one character at a time, and the operating system has to go out to the disk and write one character A, write B, write C. That's extremely inefficient. So what it tries to do is it tries to batch these things together so that it can do them all at once. So let's say you write character A, character B, character C. The operating system will go out. It won't actually write it to the file immediately. It'll store it in something called a buffer internally. And then when there's enough data that it's worth it for it to go out and write to the disk, because writing to the disk is usually pretty costly. Performance-wise. So the operating system wants to do it all at once, one big chunk. Not let's do it a little bit at a time. So close says basically I'm finished using this file. So when you close, the operating system will go ahead and write out all the data to the file that it had stored up. So if you don't close the file, a lot of times what will happen, and this depends on the operating system and what you've written and a lot of different other variables, but what will happen is you'll write your stuff out to the file. You don't call close. Your program exits. It doesn't necessarily write it all out to the file. Sometimes your file will have it'll just be missing things, right? So it won't be complete because you didn't call close, and so that didn't flush all that data out into the file. It doesn't. The operating system doesn't go, okay, let me go and do that final write. Now, a lot of times when you exit the program, it'll go and clean things up anyway for you in the background and go ahead and flush it out. Um, but again, it depends on the operating system and exactly what mode you're writing in and a lot of different variables. But in some cases, that doesn't happen. And so you should always call close. Always call close when you're done writing your file. But remember, you only call close once, because when you call close, that file variable is just not usable anymore. All right. So we call close one time at the end of our program when we're completely done writing to that file. All right, so you just call close one time. If you call close multiple times, you're going to get an error. All right, you don't want to call close twice. You just want to call it once. All right, so we have a read method that well, let's look at an example of this before we get into the read method. Oops, this is not what I was looking for. I wanted PyCharm. All right, so here we have PyCharm, and here you can see. Let me put this in presenter mode. Yeah, that's way better, right? So here we have a little program, and our little program basically, all it's going to do is we're going to open this file, and we're going to call it test.txt, and that's the name of the file, right? And we're going to put W. W means we're going to write to that file. Okay, if I put an R, it would mean I'm going to read, but I'm going to write to that file. So let's go and let's look at my folder here. So this is actually the folder, and the easiest way to get there in PyCharm, let me change the view back from presenter mode, exit presenter mode. Alright, so let's go here. The easiest way to get there is just to click on your the test.py. So this is a program that I'm running. Again, we need to figure out where is this program executing. So what we can do is we can open this in Explorer, and you can see here, this is actually the path. It's C:\users chuck PyCharm projects format 1. Yours won't be the same. Depends on your computer. Depends on your project name and all these other things. That yours will not be the same. Don't copy this from my video. Yours will be different. But if you right-click there, it'll show you where this test.py, and I have file name extensions turned on because I like to see them. And you really need to do that for programming. You need to turn those file name extensions on. All right, so we see that there's actually no program called test.txt. Let's do something just for a second, and let's change that to an R. Okay, let's change that to an R. And hold on, let me go back to presenter mode. So we're going to change that to an R, and we're going to try to run this and see what happens. All right. You see we get this error, no such file or directory test.txt, because this file does not exist, and if you try to open it in read mode, a file that doesn't exist, we're going to get this error every time. Okay, so if you get this error, it's because the file doesn't exist or the file is in the wrong folder. Again, you got to get the file in the right folder. If we put this in W mode, it doesn't matter because we're going to write to the file. So what'll happen is it'll just make a file. So if you look at this little example code, all we do is we create a file object using open for the file name test.txt, and we set it in write mode. We use the .write function, so we say file1.write, and notice there's no spaces here, right? No spaces, but around these periods. File1.write, and then we print stuff, and then I call file1.close to close the file. So now let's go back. Now after we've run the program, we see that this file actually exists now. We've created it. We've written to it stuff. So let's look at something. Let's look at what happens if we change this. We change this to 1 and we rerun this. All right. So now we have stuff1, stuff. So we have completely overwritten this file. So every time you run the program in write mode, it's going to destroy the old file and completely overwrite it. Okay? So if you want to add to the end of the file, we need to change this to A, which means append. Now, when we run this and we go back, oh, we're going to have to reload our file here. Let's go back and reload our file. Now we see that we have actually appended, meaning we've added to the file rather than overwriting the file. So straight W will overwrite the file, A will append the file. So let's look at reading from the file. So very similar to what we're looking for before. We have several methods for this. So there's the read method, and what the read method will do, it'll read the entire file object or the entire file contents in the memory. So this only works if you've opened it for reading, and it returns the contents as a string. So let's go back to our code here. So we've made this file. Let's do this. Our file has multiple things in here. So let's run this again. Now let's go to our file. Let's close it. I can probably just refresh it, but all right. Why have we not got a /n in there? All right. So now we see the slash n was there, was actually there, but we couldn't see it before. But now we see it. So we have this stuff, stuff, stuff. We have 2 lines of code, or 2 lines of text, right? Stuff, 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 and then stuff, 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 stuff. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to go back. I'm going to change this from A to R. So now we're in read mode. So if when we're in read mode and we try to write, again, you're going to get an error, not writable. That's because we opened it in read mode and we're trying to write to it. In fact, what we need to do in this case is read. So when we read, we need to assign. So what this is going to do is it's going to read everything in the file in. So we need to say, let's call this file contents equals. And then let's print. So let's print the file contents. So what this function is going to do, let's run it. It's going to read the entire file contents in, and it's going to store it in a string. And you see that when we print that string out, it's basically the whole file. It's both lines of the file. It's all stuck together. It's one big thing. All right. So the second method we have here is the read line method. So the read line method is going to read a line from the file, and it's going to return that as a string, including the slash n. So when the way to think about this is it's like all the characters in a line, right? And you're going to read some of the characters in. Once you read them in, you've processed them. They're not in the line anymore. Okay. So the read position is the location of the next item to be read from the file. So let's look. Oops. Let's look at this in the code. So let's change this to read line. And then we are going to run this. And you see we only print out one line from the file. So if we want to read the second line, let's grab this. Remember, if we close this and we try to read, well, let's just try this just to see. Let's try this after the close. So I'm going to run this. We're going to get an error, IO operation on closed file. We've already closed it. We don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. You want to do this. Oops. I did not cut. We want to do it at the end, right? So now we're going to call read line twice. We're going to print file contents the second time. Now we're going to run this, and you see we're going to get stuff, and then we're going to print the second line, stuff, stuff, stuff. So what we've done in this case is we have read one line from the file, we print it, we read the second line from the file, we print it, and then we close the thing. So this read line function is going to read one line from the file. Now notice something odd here. Notice something odd. There's actually 2 spaces. There's a blank line between the first print and the second print. And we didn't specify a blank line. So the question is, why is there a blank line there? And the answer to that is we're going to talk about that in the next video. All right. Thanks for watching, and come back for the next one.